Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode, Marilyn Roy joins us to discuss being diagnosed with autism in her 60s. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Marilyn, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
You're welcome, Doug. Thank you.
And I'd love to start out by learning about your story. Where would you say your story in the autistic community begins?
I was diagnosed when I was 65 years old at a mental health facility here in Topeka. And at the same hand, I suspected for a long, long time, several years, like going back into the 90s, that something was problematic just because I was in college then, and I couldn't listen to lectures and write them down at the same time. So that's my answer, I guess. I don't really have an autistic community, honestly. It's me.
And I heard that you've had over 30 jobs in your life. So looking back, what are some things that would have been really helpful for you from your employers to make these jobs much more accessible to you?
Well, to tell you the truth, given that there was no diagnosis when I was still working, they couldn't have really done anything to help me. I mean, if you look at it from that point of view, yeah. I mean, I stopped working. I've been in Topeka for 10 years. I stopped working a couple of years before that, and that's my answer. Without knowing that there was a diagnosis or any reason for them to accommodate, they wouldn't have been able to accommodate.
Whether it's in employment or other areas of our lives, having boundaries and also understanding the boundaries of others is critical. So what are some things that have helped you to develop your own boundaries or understand the boundaries of others?
Well, I'm still working on that, to tell you the truth. What really started me on the boundaries issue was back when I was in a speech language hearing program. Well, even before that, in 1992, I was really struggling in several ways, homelessness being one, and a friend of mine suggested that I apply for Social Security disability, and when I did, the psychologist at the time diagnosed me with depression, clinical depression, PTSD, the personality disorder diagnosis. And since I didn't know what borderline personality disorder was and I felt uneasy accepting it, I started looking for information about it, and basically that's where I started trying to understand that boundaries. Before that, I didn't know I didn't have any because I didn't know anything about them. So now I've been at it for 20, 30 years. And the readings that I did were all books that I checked out from the library. Essentially, I decided that I wasn't going to accept the borderline personality disorder and start looking at the symptoms of borderline personality disorder, what led him to give me the diagnosis. And I just started working on the issues that were at the time in the DSM, and so that's my answer.
I really loved you talking about I didn't know boundaries existed because I feel the same way before I learned about my autism. so many different times, like things would be overwhelming for me. And I think when we learn about our brains, then we can kind of change and adapt to things, and as a result of that.
Well, mine was mainly an issue of uh, angry outbursts would come at different times. During jobs that I had. I worked at the university library, and while I was in school, and I tried working at the local hospital, and finding myself um, just not knowing the diplomatic ways of phrasing certain situations. I just get frustrated, and I get angry, and that's how I got fired from so many jobs. It was only really, I will tell you, it was only really observing my mother in her interactions with people later on, after I'd gotten out of school. Like, this has been in the last 10 years or 12 years or so, and seeing how she didn't seem to have any concept of other people's boundaries. She would go up to people, and she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, but I think she had Alzheimer's. Anyway, she would just go up to people in a parking lot and start talking to them like they were her best friend. And they'd stand there looking at her with this really quizzical look. And that's when the boundaries issue really hit me, was seeing how she acted when interacting with other people. But that wasn't her all of her life either. And I'm pretty certain that the brain disease that she had was responsible for that. Anyway, boundaries are still something I'm working on, because I have to really look at people and see their body language, and listen hard for how they're phrasing whatever they're saying, to make sure that I uh, act interact with them appropriately. And I still make mistakes every now and again, but a lot better.
Earlier, you were talking about not having an autistic community, and from what I understand, you still feel isolated since learning you are autistic. What are some things that would be helpful for you in reducing this isolation?
Honestly, the isolation has more to do with where I live, which is Topeka, uh, than it does almost anything else. 'Cause I was in Lawrence for 40 something years before I moved here to take care of my mother, and I was very active in the community, advocating for the homeless and persons that had bipolar, or bipolar disorder, or the other kind of well-known um, brain disorders. And when I moved here, I left everything that I was involved in. And the last couple of years, I wasn't really too involved because I had a really challenging living situation. But I've given a lot of thought to that question that you're asking, and I've made some attempts to volunteer here in Topeka, and those opportunities I thought would be just the same as they were in Lawrence. So I just go in and volunteer, and you're taken in and you start working on it, whatever it is. But not so easy here. I know that I need community. I know that I need to be, well, I'd like to be in a neighborhood that has a neighborhood association, for one thing, because I was always a member of the neighborhood associations in Lawrence. All my family, my immediate family, are gone, so I don't have any family members to be close to. But I think if I could move out of the house that I'm in and into a more open-minded neighborhood community, then I would feel a lot better. It's I've lived by myself most of my life, and I never felt like I feel here, being so alone. I'm in a neighborhood that looks really nice, and it's historic homes, but people aren't coming to the door with plates of cookies and saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood." You know, you mostly see people walking their dogs, and that's when you say hello. But it's a hard place to live. And also, if my son and my daughter-in-law and my grandson and I were close, then that would really help a lot. I mean, that would pretty much kind of take care of things. But I haven't been able to speak with my son for more than 10 years, and that's always something I'm dealing with and feeling about. So that kind of tops the list of things that would help. And then next is where I live. So
You mentioned not learning about your autism until your 60s. So for those that might be in their 50s or 60s, or even beyond that, are
yeah,
and are wondering, to themselves, maybe someone has mentioned something to them, maybe they have thought themselves that maybe they're autistic, and think about looking into an autism assessment for themselves. In what ways has learning about your autism in your 60s positively impacted your life?
I'm telling you, I don't really have a lot of positives. Most of it's negative. Most of it is painful. It explained a lot of difficult life that I had just due to my own inability to make good decisions. But yeah, I don't have a lot of positive. I'm sorry.
Most of the talk about supporting autistic people is in childhood, or for those that are, younger adults transitioning into adulthood. Now, you're now in your 70s. So I'm kind of interested in what support do you need to improve the quality of your life?
I need support in my areas of interest. Really, I know what helped when I was in Lawrence, and I was really active in the community. I was on several boards and held little offices in the neighborhood associations. Pretty much, I had a lot of nobody knew. I mean, of course, I didn't know I had autism. So, I was just doing what I did because I had been homeless, and because I had been in and out of counseling for years, and because there was a bus system that needed establishing in Lawrence, and I got on all those committees and just did what I did. And and I was happy during that time. That lasted from about, I think it was in 1993, I went to work as a VISTA volunteer for a disabilities nonprofit, and then everything just kind of blossomed out from there. I really felt like after I'd been homeless and come back that I wanted to open the minds and hearts of people in Lawrence who most likely thought that the homeless people were men. And, we'd see them sitting downtown in front of stores. And back then, that really wasn't much known about women homeless. So I just decided I was going to join the Coalition for Homeless Concerns, and I was going to do whatever I was asked to do, and managed to make quite I think I made quite an impression on the community for a while. 'Cause I, I really was out there. I mean, I was doing public speaking and everything. That's what was happening during the time I was in Lawrence. I did that for about 7 years, and then I had to move here. So that's a long answer, but that's the best I can give you. I have friends. They're in different places. None of them are here in Topeka. So I regularly long distance call several friends that are out of state or at least out of the community, and they keep me going.
And then lastly, Marilyn, what would you like our listeners to know about, or was there anything you wanted to expand upon that we've already talked about, or anything that we haven't discussed yet?
Mainly, I think people need to look at things in their lives that aren't going well, because that's what I have. A lot of things that didn't go well. For instance, I had to relinquish my son when he was almost 5 because I got involved with the uh, cult, I guess you would call it, and I wasn't taking care of him very well. So I think they need to look at things in their lives that aren't working and try to figure out, and go and get themselves tested. Is That's what I did. I finally went over to a facility here in Topeka and met up with a psychologist that had the appropriate testing tools. There's just so much. This is really important for everybody to know and you to know about me, is that all my life I just thought, I had a psychology degree and I had a speech language hearing degree, but I never got into master's program because I couldn't afford it. So I think that it's really important that if you're going to look at autism, you need to be able to separate parenting skills, your parents, from what you can attribute to autism, because really that's where I really fall short. It's hard for me to accept the autism diagnosis because there's so much that didn't go well that I've always attributed to my childhood, my family life when I was in elementary and high school. I guess that's how I came to this. It's just things weren't working, and I was in a couple of fields where, and up in college, where the issues would come up, and then I got curious and started looking for why is this the way it is. So I think it's harder if you're a person that has different gender issues too, which isn't part of my story. And this book that I started reading, it's called Unmasking Autism. The fellow that wrote that had some differing gender issues along with what he identifies as his autism. And that reminds me to say that diagnosis, when I got it, it just really floored me, because I've always been verbal, very verbal, and I'm very outgoing. I never had any of those, the typical actions that used to be always identified with boys. I never do any flapping or strange behaviors like that. I just have always been what I am, and things just didn't work out right, and I just kept trying. But I think it's really important to make sure you know what really could be attributed to your upbringing and what really is autism, brain disorder. That makes sense to you?
That definitely makes sense to me, Marilyn, and I really appreciate this conversation. Thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad to do it. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you, Doug. Well, I wish you all the best.
Thanks so much to Marilyn for the conversation. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode regarding if you've received an autism diagnosis and how that's impacted your life. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through customized life coaching and community groups. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.